Medical Practitioners Amendment Bill 2012, order for second stage and second stage. Senator Burke, when is it proposed to take second stage?
No.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I'd like first of all to welcome Minister Riley to the House, and I'll call on Senator Burke, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Lasco here. Look, welcome, Minister. I'm delighted to be here in the House introducing and moving the second stage of this bill. In starting off, I think it's important that I would acknowledge your contribution, Minister. Back in October 2009, you introduced the Medical Practitioners Professional Indemnity Amendment Bill, and that was introduced in October 2009. The then Minister, Mary Harn, at the time acknowledged the need for the change in this area and the need for legislation to be put in place to make it compulsory for medical practitioners to have insurance. It's now 3.5 years on, and we're back here with a new draft, which I worked with a number of different parties, and I think it's important that I would acknowledge their contribution in bringing forward this bill. And there are people like Dr. Brian Hunt, Parliamentary Draftsperson, Claire Mungavin, Solicitor from my own office, and Tony O'Connor, Senior Counsel. And I also think it's important that I would acknowledge the work and having met with the Caroline Spillane, members of the Medical Council, the Kieran Breen from the State Claims Agency, representatives of the IMO, the IHCA, MPS insurers, and the Department of Health officials themselves. So I'd like to thank all the people who assisted my office and myself in preparing this draft bill. At the start, last Cathaoirleach, could I just mention the point that you as a car owner and driver cannot drive a car without insurance. I as a solicitor cannot practice without insurance, yet your local GP, there is no legal obligation on them to have insurance. And that isn't to say that GPs don't have insurance. I think 99.9% of all medical practitioners in the country do have insurance. But there is concern, and there has been concern with some time, in relation to whether or not we can make sure that someone is not offering a medical service, and then if it goes radically wrong, that there is adequate safeguards there to compensate someone who may have suffered a loss. And I think that came into being to the fore very much, I think in 2008, 2009 in relation to cosmetic surgery. I think the issue may have been raised, although I don't think it was an issue in the end, in relation to the issue in relation to breast implants. And there's also a new area which is arising, and that's in relation to people offering services where they do have insurance, but the question mark is, do they have adequate insurance? And I refer in particular where there's been a growing, apologies, there's been a growing tendency to offer scanning services, and there is a question mark whether the insurance that people have is adequate to cover that service. We have a duty as legislators to make sure that the public are protected, and that's the idea of this bill, is that to make sure that we do have compulsory insurance there for all medical practitioners. The HSE is already providing cover for all of their employees, all of those who are engaged in medical services, but there are also people who are working in a private capacity as medical practitioners, and we need to make sure that their adequate safeguards are there. The bill itself is, I suppose, self-explanatory in the sense that it has to amend the Medical Practitioners Act 2007 and the various sections of, and I refer to that. I think it's also important to refer to the reports in the UK, where there's a similar problem in the UK, and in particular to the Finlay-Scott report of 2010. And that report examined the whole area of professional indemnity insurance in the UK. And it's interesting to read in that report, and it recommended, and this is 2010, it said, the conclusions, in my judgment, making insurance or indemnity a statutory condition of registration is the most cost-effective and proportionate means of achieving the policy objective. The main reasons are a statutory condition of registration would apply equally and unequivocally to all registered healthcare professionals, would be seen by patients and the public to do so, and would enhance patient and public confidence. A statutory condition of registration has the unique advantage that when supported by appropriate powers, enforcement action can be taken through low-cost administrative procedures rather than high-cost fitness to practice procedures. As a result, a statutory condition of registration would reduce enforcement costs compared to with alternatives without increasing compliance costs or the cost of compliance testing. And D, statutory condition of registration would require the registrant to be able to prove a positive, namely the presence of cover, rather than the regulator to prove a negative, namely the absence of cover. And basically, there's various recommendations in that report which we took into account in drafting this legislation. I know it's not perfect, Minister, and I know it's something that your own department may very well, and I know probably will, bring forward some amendments to, which I think is what I would certainly support when I know that we're all working in the public interest. The bill itself is divided into 5 parts and contains 9 sections, and I'll just briefly maybe touch on the various sections and what they do. Section 1 sets out the short title of the bill and provides for the collective citation of the bill. Section 2 provides the definition of Principal Act, which I referred to earlier, which is the Medical Practitioners Act 2007. Section 3 amends Section 2 of the 2007 Act so as to insert 4 new definitions, there being insurer or indemnity provider. And I think it's important that there is a difference between insurer and indemnity provider. For instance, the MPS is providing cover. It is not an insurance company, but it is providing it is the Medical Protection Society, and it's providing cover for the vast majority of medical practitioners in this country. Section they have the clinical indemnity scheme, professional, and then the Section 3 also gives clear definition of clinical indemnity scheme, professional indemnity committee, and professional indemnity cover. Section 4 amends Section 10 of the 2007 Act by substituting a revised text of Section 1, the purpose of which is to expand the immunity of the Medical Council so as to ensure that the Medical Council will not be held liable for their work in administering this procedure. Section 5 amends Section 11 of the 2007 Act by inserting 7 new subsections, and it empowers the Medical Council to make rules specifying each category of medical practitioner who will be required to hold professional indemnity cover. And there are different categories of medical practitioners, as you're well aware, Minister, from GP to people who are working as medical consultants in the private area, and then there's a need for different types of cover as well. And basically, the section goes through the additional powers it's giving to the Medical Council, and it then sets out, in Section 2C, requires Medical Council to make rules specifying the indemnity providers which have been recognised. And I think the Act itself provides for both the insurer and the indemnifier, and specifically, and we're also involving the State Claims Agency because of the fact that they are now dealing with all of the claims in the HSE, and therefore they have a huge amount of expertise that would not otherwise be available. And I think it's important that their role would be recognised as well, and their advices would be taken on board in the guidelines that are being issued. Section 2D, or subsection 2D, states that the Medical Council must not issue a certificate of registration to a medical practitioner unless he or she has provided evidence of required level of cover being in place. And then the Section 2E allows the Medical Council to specify in its rules the minimum level of cover to be held by practitioners. Subsection 2F empowers the Medical Council to exempt practitioners from the requirement to hold professional indemnity cover, and I suppose that would apply in particular to people who are working and fully employed in the HSE, as they would have cover already in place. Move on to Section 6 empowers the Medical Council to establish a professional indemnity committee, and this committee would deal specifically with dealing with the whole area of professional indemnity cover. And Section 7 then sets out that it is an offence for a person to practice medicine whilst either not being in compliance with the Medical Council rules or not having in place professional indemnity cover, or falsely representing that he or she has the correct level of cover in place. Section 7 also makes it an offence for a person to contravene sections 110, 11 and 112, which are new sections proposed to be inserted in the 2007 Act. Section 8 inserts a new Section 44A in the 2007 Act, so as to place a duty on insurers to notify the Medical Council. A lot of people would be paying insurance, paying it by instalments, but if the insurer becomes aware that the payment has stopped, then obviously at a certain stage professional indemnity cover would cease to exist, that there's an obligation on the insurer to notify the council and the person who is paying the insurance, so that there isn't a situation where someone might have paid the first or second stage of the insurance cover, but then find that for the next 8 or 9 months they have no cover in place at all because they haven't paid the full premium. Section 9 inserts 3 new sections into the 2007 Act, and then there Section 11, Section 110 imposes a general obligation of full disclosure on medical practitioners. Section 111 provides that where a person or business alternate patient proposes to engage a medical practitioner, he or she is obliged to seek proof of the existence of the required level of professional insurance. And that's in case where someone takes on a locum in a medical practice to make sure that there is adequate cover there. And Section 112 obliges the medical practitioner to display evidence of their professional indemnity cover, and I think that's very important as well. So that's the Act in summary, in a very short summary. I think it's important. I may not be ticking all the boxes in this draft piece of legislation, and I fully understand that the department will come forward with amendments on it, and I'll be very happy to work with them in bringing forward this legislation to be put in place. And again, thank you, Minister, and thank you, the officials in the department, for their help and assistance in preparing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Senator Burke. Senator Noon is to second the motion.
Formally second the motion. Thank you, Lasco Hirla. First of all, I'd like to welcome the bill, which has been called for as far back as 2009 when we were in opposition, as Senator Burke has pointed out. I'm glad that we have been consistent in this and are working to ensure that we act in government as we called for then when we weren't in government. This bill is eminently sensible, reduces liability and creates peace of mind. If enacted, it would ensure that medical practitioners are obliged to hold professional indemnity insurance, something which should have been the case for many years now, I believe. Incredibly, in Ireland, there is currently no regulatory authority in place to force doctors to take out insurance, with the result that there is no legal obligation on them to have it. Obviously, many do, but those who don't take it out aren't necessarily disadvantaged by the fact, and this leads honest doctors to, as I've heard myself on many occasions, question the point and their own wisdom. This lax attitude would not be tolerated in the legal world, as I know from my own experience, where we cannot actually even work without indemnity insurance, and in many cases clients of legal offices will insist that the appropriate level of cover is in place before they will actually employ solicitors, especially in the area that I work in, which is insurance defence. They'll demand that any office that they operate with have a certain level of insurance. So if you're to apply that logic to the medical area, it would seem appropriate that any patient of any potential GP or consultant should really demand to know that they are properly insured before they take their services. In this sense, it is really quite incredible that in the medical world, where mistakes truly cannot be undone, that the same standard is not applied to the medical practitioners. Therefore, as outlined, this bill will ensure that before a certificate to practice is issued by the Medical Council, written evidence that proper medical professional indemnity insurance is held by the practitioner will be required. One potential concern I had was in relation to current doctors who don't have professional indemnity insurance but already have a Medical Council certificate, and if anything can be done about this. However, it seems from my reading of Section 7 and 8 of the bill that this is covered appropriately. Section 7 states that it is an offence for a person to practice medicine whilst not having in place professional indemnity cover. Similarly, Section 8 says that there is a duty on insurers to notify the Medical Council if they become aware that a medical practitioner's professional indemnity cover has lapsed or has been cancelled. Again, I think this is an important angle to cover. Ultimately, I believe that if the Medical Council, the State Claims Agency and a financial regulatory authority could work together to determine the appropriate levels of insurance which are to be held by practitioners, this would be a straightforward system to migrate and should cause no serious problems for medical practitioners, while also providing confidence and assurance for patients that they are in safe hands at all times. I'd like to thank the Minister for attending the House today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Noon. Now calls Senator Mooney, and you have 6 minutes.
Cathaoirleach and Fáilte Dara, may I compliment the Minister for showing his continuing respect for this House by coming before the House for this important piece of legislation, and I'm sure that he has a sense of déjà vu in listening to the very robust proposals that have been put forward by the proposer of the bill, Senator Burke. I don't want to necessarily go over everything that has been dealt with here, and particularly as the Minister himself would have spent many waking hours in 2009 putting together this bill, and presumably went down the same route that Senator Burke has gone down in assembling his arguments in favour of it. What's rather interesting, just a couple of things, that paragraph 51 of the Medical Council's Guide to Professional Conduct and Ethics for Registered Medical Practitioners simply states that medical practitioners, quote, must ensure, unquote, that they have, quote, adequate professional indemnity cover for all healthcare services, unquote. Naturally enough, this can't be equated with the statutory obligation to have in place such cover, and consequently it could be submitted that patient protection measures are not what they ought to be. Fianna Fáil would support the objectives of this bill, and indeed, in referring to the 2009 debate, Minister Harney herself was very sympathetic towards the bill when it was brought forward by then Deputy, now Minister Riley. And in fact, in putting forward the arguments at that time, a number of issues arose that Deputy Riley, that Minister Riley put forward. He said that the majority of doctors are responsible and that they do carry appropriate medical negligence insurance. One would assume that that would be the case, and he, as a medical practitioner himself, because of the highly litigious nature of the business in which GPs operate. I know we haven't quite gone as far as the United States, but it has often been said in recent years that we seem to be going down that particular route, that doctors tend to take a more cautious overview now than heretofore in terms of how they deal with patients, and I'm sure that our friend and colleague Professor Crown will have something to say in that regard. What Minister Harney said at the time, I think, is still relevant. She continually refers to the trust between patient and doctor. I would trust Professor Crown completely if I were under his care, and perhaps wouldn't necessarily be thinking in terms of whether he was covered adequately or not if I was availing of his expertise. But at the same time, in the real world in which we live, I'm sure that Professor Crown would be of the view, as indeed his colleagues, that it is better that they are defended by having in place adequate insurance in the event of something going wrong, because that essentially is what we're talking about here, of something going wrong. Rather interestingly, it was stated at the time that the Department of Health and Children and the Medical Council didn't know how many practitioners have insurance, what level of cover they hold, or the type of insurance they hold, who provides it. I'm sure that that situation presumably still the same, but this would be addressed by this particular piece of legislation, and that it would then be, because it's obligatory, obviously the figures will be out there. Also, the aim of the bill was to close a loophole that could allow an unscrupulous doctor to apply for medical registration and practice without insurance, which presumably can happen in the admittedly very small number. I think Senator Burke referred to 99.9% of those practising having adequate insurance. And obviously, in the event of mistakes or medical negligence, I think the state must offer patients the best protection that it can. Compulsory indemnity would instill confidence in the system and guarantee patients redress if something went wrong. That's exactly the words that Minister Riley used at that time, and I think we could all agree with it. He actually also points out, and I'm curious to know whether there's been any change in these figures, that it was expected the state would pay out some €60 million in medical legal costs in 2009, 20 million of which went to the lawyers. 20 million. So I know that far be it from me to suggest that Senator Burke would be a vested interest in this regard, but possibly he might also, well, I better not go down that road. However, to finalise this, then Minister Harney, in her response, gave the background and the context in which this debate was taking place. The medical practitioners' legislation of 2007 was a comprehensive modernisation of legislation governing the medical profession, and that then dated back some 30 years. She talks about that it was clear from contributions in that debate in 2007 that at the heart of the doctor-patient relationship was trust, and that when one is a patient or when one's family members are patients, one wants to have the utmost confidence and trust in one's doctor, not from the perspective of blind faith or deference, but for good reason. However, she did say that she believed that people wanted she didn't believe that people wanted a bevy of lawyers, legislators or insurers metaphorically sitting in on the confidential discussions with their doctors. And I'm sure all of us would agree with that. Maybe, just maybe, that was what was guiding her view at that time when she deferred the bill, even though she said that she fully agreed with the objectives behind the bill at that time. She then went on to say that given the complexities and sensitivities of medical indemnity insurance, the method deserves detailed reflection from the legal, administrative and practical points of view. She doesn't elaborate on that, Minister, and perhaps you might. Has anything changed since in relation to what she refers to as complexities and sensitivities of medical indemnity insurance? I would have thought that, as has been pointed out, that financial intermediaries, solicitors and a whole range of other professionals are compelled to hold professional indemnity cover. I don't see why it should be any different for the medical profession. Or, sorry, should it be any more complex? Or was this just government's way of saying, well, that's a fine bill you have, Minister, such is the way that it happens, as you know, in opposition and government. It's a lovely bill, we really think it's wonderful and all that, but really we're not going to give you the credit for introducing it, so we'll kick it down the road for a few months and then come back. However, the Minister didn't come back, and the last reference that I can find to what happened, this very excellent bill, was, if you could just bear with me for just a brief moment if I can find it, but from memory, yes. The then Taoiseach and Acting Health Minister Mary Coughlin, in January of 2011, and it's a rather interesting date, said that the heads of a medical practitioners amendment bill to make it mandatory for registration purposes for doctors to have clinical indemnity stroke insurance had yet to be approved by government. And this was some 18 months perhaps from the time that you had introduced it. So was there something going on in the Department of Health that perhaps we need to maybe now know about? Well, in fairness,
it's the longest 6 minutes of my life.
In fairness, I didn't go down the road of all that I had in the script that showed the very vast body of legislation that was introduced by Deputy Minister Harney during her time in office that brought in the very infrastructure on which current practice within the department and outside and medical practice is built on. Because I didn't want to do that because I thought it was going to be accused of political point scoring. But I mean, I wasn't introducing politics into it at all. I'm just asking the question, is there a particular reason why, having agreed, the Minister of the day agreed with then Deputy Riley that this was a good bill, that it should be introduced, and yet she went on to talk about legal complexities, and it wasn't elaborated on, and then there was a further delay, and that the last word of the last government was
the Minister will respond.
So that's really the core of what I'm asking. Yeah, is there some obstacle to this bill?
Thank you, Senator Mooney. Thank you. I now call Senator Gilroy. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome to the House Minister. I first want just to comment on the amount of work that Senator Burke has put into bringing this bill to the point that it's at, and the list of stakeholders that he referred to. I had a conversation with Senator Burke the last few days, and it is rather remarkable the amount of work he's put into this, and it certainly is a bill that is very, sorry, it's remarkable the amount of work that Senator Burke has put in, exemplary in fact for a senator. It's probably one of the more elaborate and well thought out bills that I've seen coming through the House, originating in this House and on the private member's time, and I want to commend Senator Burke for that. I noticed, Minister, that it is a continuation of an idea that you had yourself in opposition, and that Senator Burke has taken that idea and developed it to the point at which he has developed, so it's certainly very good indeed. That there is no legal requirement for medical professionals to have insurance is mind-boggling, really. It's something I hadn't considered until last week, until it was brought to my attention by Senator Burke, and it's something that I don't think that anybody really knows out there in the general public, that if we were to go into your GP or specialist in his clinic, how many people would think to ask the question, have you insurance to adequately indemnify me against any risk that might be inherent in this procedure? I don't think anyone would do that. It would be the very last thing I think that anyone would think of, and yet there is no legal obligation for the practitioner to first of all have indemnity, and second of all to say he has indemnity, or she. So Senator Burke referred, excuse me, my voice is nearly gone, which many people will be glad to hear. Indeed, and it frustrates me as well, to the point that it nearly wears my voice out, having to point out the flaws in the previous administration. But 99.9% of medical practitioners have indeed got some sort of indemnity, according to Senator Burke's figures. But are those figures based on anything more than on we'd say what would appear intuitive? Because if those figures are such, that means that for every 1,000 practitioners in the country, there's one person out there without any kind of medical insurance at all. So I'd like perhaps just put that to the Ministry. You might be able to bring some further figures to it. And it does seem that that even, I think what Senator Mooney referred to, that the IMO's figures themselves are unaware of the numbers of people and the variety or type of insurance that is provided. In the ever-evolving medical landscape in which